Hello, we are live. I am Brigantia Blackbird of the Blackbird Grimoire, and today's live stream is a little bit different than what I ordinarily do. Over the weekend, I was watching a replay of Jacob Toddson's. His channel used to be called The Wisdom of Odin, but he had a live stream, and the theme was: Is Norse paganism disappearing again, or is Norse paganism losing popularity? And that expanded upon, what is the fate of paganism in general? Are we going up? Are we going down? What's happening with us? Essentially, what could the future hold based upon what we know right now? And I wanted to address that directly to Jacob in this live stream today, although I know there's a non-existent chance, let's be realistic, that he'll be tuning in to hear what a teeny tiny channel like me has to say. But on the off chance that Jacob does pop in, or anyone associated with him, hello, I am Brigantia Blackbird. I am an American pagan witch. I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. I was the third generation on my father's side of the family and the fourth generation on my mother's. So I know a little something about what it's like to break away from a well-established family spiritual tradition and start all over, and just have the get up and go to take this spiritual plunge into very different climes. So I I was very touched and very moved by Jacob's live stream. I really felt a lot of what he said in my bones, and he touched on a few issues that are really near and dear to my heart as well. So in that vein, let's do this. I've prepared a little presentation because if I don't, I do tend to ramble on. And on the off chance that Jacob Toddson should see this, I don't want to waste too much of his time. He's a super busy man. He travels a lot, does a lot of work with video and editing, so I want to be respectful of that. So my first reaction to his live stream when he was talking about, are we starting to see, a waning of Norse paganism? What's going on with that? The first thing I really thought about was what I've also observed in witchcraft circles and in paganism more generally since I began. When I put my feet onto this particular path, I saw lots of people involved with the Celtic pantheon. I saw a lot of people who were very much aligned with Wicca. And as time went on, I saw people drifting into Norse spirituality or just in kind of to broad witchcraft. And I saw a huge rise in eclecticism. And I have started to see of the Norse circles. And in the past few months, particularly, I've seen a lot of people on social media posting about Slavic paganism. In fact, on my daily forecast video today on my Rumble channel, there was someone who asked me, well, what if I'm interested in paganism, but it's more on the Slavic side? And I said, well, I mean, you have to go pursue that if that's what you're being drawn to. And then on places like X, Twitter, whatever the hell we're calling it these days, I do see a huge uptick in posts that have to do with the Greco-Roman pantheon and what their practices were in the past, their general philosophy, how they're wanting to really resurrect that now. And that's really what I'm seeing. And with witchcraft circles, I do see that there's kind of the stabilization upon a more eclectic approach to craft, which that does make a lot of sense because witchcraft is so much of what you do. And hey, if it works, it works. And we'll iron out the philosophical details later. That seems to be the way my community does it. So, but there does seem to be, at least on the deistic and the devotional side of things, a little bit of shifting from pantheon to pantheon. So I am definitely observing the same thing as Jacob. And I think part of this, what this might signify, is that we are still very much in a spiritual exploration phase as a whole. Very few people are at a setting down roots kind of phase of their personal spirituality or as a broader community. And I think part of this does have to do with the very complex ancestral roots of American pagans in particular. I don't know if people are seeing a similar kind of drifting around and roving and exploring when we look at our cousins across the pond. I don't know if anyone has observed that. If they have or if they haven't, please let me know. I would love to hear from you. But with the case of American pagans, I mean, I've said this on my channel many times before. Paganism is so intensely family oriented. So whenever you're at the very beginning of your journey and you're reaching out to pagans saying, well, where should I even begin with this? A lot of times they say, well, go back to your family tree. Where did your family come from? Start looking at that. And then you can go on from there. And for us, I mean, you could have family roots in 12 different countries or on, every single continent on this planet. it's not a simple matter to just go back, because then you have the next question of, well, what does all of this mean? How can I mesh this together? Because their DNA came together to make a single person. So, what does that mean for my spirituality? Can I even have a cohesive practice? So that's where my first thoughts really took me. And as I got to meditating and reflecting upon what all of this might mean, the first thing is that because people have, through their exploration of paganism up to this point, they have learned how to hear that call of the gods. And so I think when they have other gods that are saying, yo, hello, come talk to me. I have something to say to you. I have something to teach you. You have something to learn. I think people are overall a lot more sensitized to that pull, or at least they've learned to be slightly more trusting of their intuition, to when they start thinking about something like, oh, I'm getting kind of obsessed about this particular field. They say, okay, maybe that's what I need to go off and do and study and figure out why that is having such a pull on my spirit. And I think another benefit to this particular process, because there are benefits, as much as it might sound like people are just wandering around in confusion, some are, but I think a benefit of going through this process is that as people are searching around for their spiritual home, they are inadvertently doing this massive exploration of pagan traditions. And through that process, they're seeing that there are a lot of areas of common ground. There's a lot of different differences, and I don't want to minimize that or let alone deny it, but there's also a lot of common ground. Reverencing the gods, honoring your ancestors, the pursuit of excellence in everything that you do, striving to be of good character, being the kind of person who looks after their family and who is a good benefit upon their community, whether it's your spiritual community or just your community as a whole. These things all seem to be very common in every form of paganism that I've really come across, even witchcraft. And that might sound a little bit strange to people who aren't as familiar with the craft, but as I've covered in previous videos, the center of the witch's pyramid, that is kind of this metaphor for how we do what we do. The center of that is always supposed to be filled with love. And so if that isn't about, the betterment of yourself and the betterment of the people who you care about and who are in your field, I don't know what would be. And what I wonder with all of this, at least for American pagans, if we are really seeing the beginning stages of the emergence of an American style paganism, American style witchcraft, and certainly regional paganism. Um, I keep coming back to this because every ounce of every fiber of my being is really saying we're at the beginning of something. So, in Jacob's live stream, he also talked about what happens to people after they leave paganism, because we are seeing some people drift away from it. And what I generally have observed is that they either tend to become atheists if they aren't continuing, or there are people who just kind of fall back into Christianity. And Jacob talked a little bit about this on his live stream about why he might be. I wanted to elaborate on that. I do think that atheism has certain attraction for people because they can set aside the entire question of spirituality and religion, and you don't have to deal with the entire issue if you don't want to. They can just put that aside, and I think some people do that because it saves on the brain space. And one of the unfortunate side effects of this is sometimes this does lead them to treat religious people like scratching posts. And while it is a lot less common to see atheists kind of go after pagans, it has happened on occasion. Generally, they go after people of the Abrahamic traditions, and all parties involved generally give as good as they got. I don't think anyone's conduct in those conversations really stands up well to scrutiny, but it is more so. I think that does indicate that they still have a wrestled spirit about something, and so they're trying to. I think they're trying to either. I think they are trying to get some company, evangelistic atheism of sorts. Another thing is that I do think that this is about alleviating stress, of letting go of something that is very troubling, something that is huge. And of course, atheism simplifies everything in existence down to the material, that which we can see, touch, taste, all of that other good stuff, things that can be measured in the physical realm. And I think people lean towards this if they aren't about I'm going to take out my frustrations on religious people, which there are some who do that. I think the other thing is that people are just mentally exhausted. And I can't say that I particularly blame them, because there's a lot of reasons for us to be mentally exhausted. So I certainly see why people might fall into this. And then, of course, when it comes to people running back to Christianity, I think it has everything to do with wanting a sense of familiarity, particularly during uncertain times. We've had quite a bit of upheaval in the next couple of years. That is not going away anytime soon. And so I think people who, if they give up on their pagan journey, it's easier because it's familiar and because there are churches available everywhere, and they can certainly find people who will encourage them to go on that journey. I think it's easier for them to say, I'll just switch my team jerseys and I'll just be Christian again, as if it was really that simple. Another appeal of Christianity, and I think this is really what sucked in our ancestors too, the ones who converted voluntarily, that is, it's that utopian worldview of Christianity. And I think that's appealing for people who struggle with the rigors of life, who don't see, who they cannot find meaning in their struggle. Uh, they don't always allow themselves to appreciate and enjoy the full measure of their victories when they encounter that, and that leads to a lot of frustration. They say, "I just don't want to be burdened anymore." And then you have Christianity and other religions like it saying, "If you do X, Y, Z, then you can go to heaven, and everything will be lollipops and kittens from now until eternity." And so, what that amounts to is that you have to do a lot less thinking. You have to practice more obedience to really be in the club, but you're not necessarily having to think about. You are following a prescribed program. And of course, the people who fall back into Christianity, that gives them a defined tribe, a number of defined tribes, and they just have to conform to that. And it simplifies all of their spiritual activity to the pursuit of what is their preferred afterlife, or what is an afterlife they are trying to avoid. And they have a very black and white lens of reality. Again, it's that simplification. Everything is complicated and overwhelming, and they don't know if they can handle it, so they look for something that simplifies it back down. And for some people who actually do have a home in paganism, they end up going either atheist or Christian, just because it's familiar. So now for the pagan future, which is where Jacob's live stream was really focused upon. I have a few thoughts about that, which I have shared and will continue to share. I do think that American paganism is likely to not only be a thing, I think it's likely to develop quite differently than the paganism we see overseas. And I think it's because overseas, those are the regions where the particular traditions actually evolved from. And so when we're over here, we are cut off from that land, but we do have this land. And then as you get more attuned to it and you start becoming aware of the various spirits tied to it, you start feeling the presence of deity that you can't quite necessarily define. We are interacting with different energies. We have slightly different climates. We have different environmental cycles. We have different ways of life. And of course, we have a lot of technology that our ancient pagan ancestors could not have dreamt of. So the idea that we'll be exactly the same as our modern counterparts overseas, I don't think that's realistic. And I think we will continue to see increased regionalism. And I do think that regionalism will be aggravated by the political turmoil that we are experiencing right now. I I wish I could say that this will be kind of calming down. I think this is a storm that has built up over time, and it's just going to have to expend its energy. And the only question is, how do we deal with that? And I think our spirituality is a tool that we can use to help manage the anxiety that goes along with our current circumstances in the country. And I think it's a way to help us keep our eyes focused on the future and not just on the troubles of the moment. And of course, a question that comes up with this is, are we, American pagans, are we just the spiritual colonies of other more established traditions, or are we actually American pagans, and are we pioneering and establishing traditions based upon what we have learned so far, putting that into relationship with the land that we're actually occupying, and that many of us have ancestors, many generations of ancestors buried in that soil. So we do have that link to it now. Are we going to really claim our own place in the sun? I think that's very much ahead of us as a question for more and more people to contemplate. Now, with the digital space, Jacob, he did criticize a great deal about essentially how people conduct themselves on social media, which again, this is another area which I don't think anyone's conduct could bear up well under examination. We've all made nasty mistakes and have treated people in a less than respectful fashion in the digital world. Those who haven't, I congratulate you on your impending sainthood. For the rest of us mere mortals, we know our deeds. And I think a lot of that has everything to do when you are not face to face with someone, when you don't see their face, when you aren't seeing their body language, when you cannot hear their voice, you're just not going to treat them the way you would a human being who was actually in your physical space. And so I think as we go forward, our efforts on the digital realm, I think it'll be very much more in the means of this is how we are educating people. We are providing explanation for our beliefs, and of course, we are doing outreach. We're letting people know, hey, here I am. Are you like-minded? You can come hang out with me. I mean, we can do. I think we can still continue to use it as a tool for that, but for actual community building, I'm more convinced than ever that it is going to be an in-person endeavor. I think in the future we will see a lot more out and out pagan families, and that will, by extension, start to create pagan-oriented communities, whether it's people who are majority pagan, which I think we can eventually get there, or if we do get increasingly fractured in this country, actual pagan communities of just what we're doing. This is the norm. Other people, they do what they do in their territory. In our territory, we are doing this. I think there is a possibility we see that in the future. And of course, to get there, more pagan storytelling. And with it, throughout the pagan storytelling, you start having pagan values explicitly seeping into the broader culture. So much of it is already there in the building blocks of it. Whenever I have get into disputes online with people about, this country was founded on Christian values, Judeo-Christian values, I say, okay, Snooky Bear, you go read the Havamal, the Celtic Triads, you brush up on your Greek and Roman philosophers, and then you tell me about how this country was founded on virtues that are somehow unique to your religion. Or more likely, we can then have a talk about, isn't it nice that we have this common ground? And then we can have a more productive conversation. But I do think that it'll start being more open, that there are certain pagan traditions or pagan lines of thought, inherited pagan wisdom that has relevance to all peoples. I mean, even for an atheist, they may not take the spiritual aspects of our faith particularly seriously, but I think they can certainly see how it leads to a better outcome if people are honorable, if they treat people who treat them well with that honor, if they are on guard against people who mean them ill. I think they can certainly appreciate the value of that, as well as the value of people who are seeking to um, do whatever task in their life that is for them to do at the highest level of excellence that they can hope to achieve. I think they can be very sympathetic to that. So that benefits anybody, even if they don't have a relationship with the gods. And another thing that occurred to me, because Jacob started talking about the monetization of paganism, and some people were selling really cheap, shoddy goods, because, oh, I use this simple, or this is jewelry, or this or that, without putting any kind of heart and soul into their work. I think we will start to see a little bit less of that, and the emergence of actual proper pagan artisans, which we should be web weaving on that. But the nice thing about pagan artisans, whether they're designing clothing or they're making ritual tools or creating art or music or whatever it is that they're doing, their work really acts as an ambassador to the rest of the world. It gives people a visual cue and it gives them an increased familiarity about what paganism is all about, how we conduct ourselves, how we do business, and what things we find important enough to create. And I think that is very impactful on people, much more so than we realized. And honestly, I think sometimes a good impression through the creation of beauty, it goes deeper and it lasts longer than 1,000 academic arguments. So that's my thought on that. Now, of course, we have challenges. And I think our biggest and most foremost challenge is having confidence in ourselves. There's so much that drags us down. We are subject to a lot of criticism. I mean, isn't it amazing how the more people talked about how important it is not to judge anybody ever, that we also see a huge rise in criticism, and sometimes from the very people preaching to not criticize. And what it does is that we're just nitpicking ourselves to death. I have seen so many boring arguments on places like Twitter that were purely semantic, did not get anywhere. And what it did is just that it made people really question themselves, particularly if they took the person doing the nitpicking seriously. So learning the difference between taking in someone else's opinion and evaluating it and seeing if there's what they have to say is worth something, and then just being vulnerable to any idea that goes through someone else's head and giving it undue importance. I think we're going to have to sort out those boundaries. That's going to be a huge challenge for us. And then the next big challenge I see for us, particularly in America, is allowing ourselves to really be at home, because there is immense pressure from many political and cultural sources saying, oh, you don't belong here. You shouldn't be here. You're a transplant. You don't count. As actually everything you are isn't in front. I mean, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible, and that absolutely gets in the way of us developing our own traditions of paganism. Because what else could we have? I mean, imagine if, let's say, there's this massive EMP, and the digital world is dead, and for some period of time we are all cut off from everyone except for our immediate community. We're not communicating with people halfway across the world. We're not doing all of the things we're accustomed to doing by habit these days through social media. All we have is our local resources, and we're dealing with local people. Can you imagine operating as a pagan in those circumstances? In some ways, it would be this beautiful opportunity for us to say, well, there's a lot of things I don't have good answers for. However, I see the immediate needs of my community. I see the tools at my disposal. So I'm going to use the wisdom that I have accumulated to try to be of good benefit. And then, as people do that and they're reacting to their particular challenges and their opportunities, then I think you would naturally see this outgrowth of how pagan spirituality is expressed. So I think maybe if we put ourselves in that mindset of what would we do if we didn't have the voices of, a billion other people in our ear, what would we do then? What would we think? How would we conduct ourselves? I think that would help us feel more at home and also act more confidently. And then another thing that would help us, I think, is learning to become more principle oriented. Whenever I read the lore or research anything about pagan history or anything, the question that I always keep forefront in my mind is, what did I learn from this? What is the lesson? What does this mean? And that's a different mindset from being more rules oriented, and asking myself, well, how do my overseas cousins do it? It's worth taking their opinions into account. But for reasons that I've already expressed, I don't think that we can just take what they do, transplant it here, and expect it to just graft on naturally and immediately. I don't really think that's how it's going to work. Excuse me. And another thing that I think about that might make people more rules oriented, or I have to have answers, or I have to have this really rigid idea. I think that is actually an extension of the influence of Abrahamic traditions and also of atheism. Of you've got to have all the answers, you got to have them down pat. It's got to be just so, and and that's just not really how pagan spirituality works. And I'm reminded of a little catchphrase on one of the XJW YouTube channels I used to watch, JW Critical Thought. One of the hosts on there said he would rather have questions he can't answer than answers he can't question. And that has always really resonated with me, particularly as I've gotten further along in my own pagan journey. I think it is okay to have questions that we can't answer and to say, I don't know the answer to this. I'm not sure. And then say, but, based upon what I know, I can reason on this. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I think that's also going to tie in to getting past what I would describe as the falling in love stage of paganism. Jacob talked a little bit about this, about, having this very vivid spiritual experience. Having had those, it is very much akin to that moment where you just see someone and you just you're feeling something. And the more you find out about them, the more you're just falling head over heels, and you've got the butterflies and all this good stuff. And, for a while, that's really great. But then, of course, you don't live in a high. You have moments of highs in your life, whether we're talking about our romantic prospects or our spirituality, but you're not always going to be at that spiritual high. And so people who are just looking for that high, and who haven't yet learned how to appreciate the moments of quiet, the moments of steadiness. I think those are the ones who might continue to explore, perhaps beyond what they really need to, or ones who might end up abandoning paganism altogether because they wanted the result, they wanted the high, they wanted the answer, they wanted to just know and then have the matter settled and go on to other projects. So when but this isn't a project. This is spirituality. This is religion. This is about having a compass for your very life. And, as long as you are, incorporated in this form, that's going to have relevance. That's going to be an ongoing thing. So learning to embrace, a steadiness, the pattern of pagan practice, enduring pagan practice, I think that's going to be a huge challenge in the years to come, but I think we'll meet it. Then another challenge that I think we face is learning to come out of our shells and forming friendships. This will be particularly difficult for people who like the broom closet, not just people who are there out of fear or anxiety of how people might react, but people who really do enjoy being in the broom closet, and this is just their own little thing that they keep completely to themselves. And I certainly do not advocate for people making every aspect of their spirituality public, because for one thing, a lot of this is very personal, and sometimes it really does just have relevance for us on our own personal journey. But I do think we need to open up a bit. I think we need to be open to forming friendships, creating frith, and just not being quite so detached, of looking at each other as genuine brothers and sisters and not just giving lip service to that idea. Another challenge is learning to be more long term thinking and planning for future pagans. The whole point of life is to pass it on, and that includes wisdom, things that we know that enriches life, and of course, what works. What have we found in our spiritual experience that really worked? That is important information for the pagans who are growing up now. There's going to come a time when they face similar challenges, and they're going to look to their elders as well as to the Lord and say, "Ideas? Not really sure. Could you point me in a direction that might help me?" We need to be able to provide that for them. And so, thinking about that as we are in our own stages of development, I think that makes us more likely to be of use to those future pagans. And of course, becoming visible. That goes right in with the whole opening up, coming out of our shells, becoming those torches to attract the like-minded. And then, as we are becoming more visible, making an effort to conduct ourselves in an admirable fashion, so that we make a more or less a good impression upon people who are open-minded. We're not going to be able to move the people whose hearts and minds are truly closed to us, but people who are open-minded, they can stop seeing us as this mysterious, dangerous force, to people who are just normal, upright, moral people who care about the world and their families, and who want to make a success of life. That's not very scary. It's not very dramatic. And so, people who can see us as we actually are, that goes a long way towards breaking down prejudices. It isolates the people who have more medieval views about paganism. I'll put it that way. It makes them look more and more like the lunatics that they are. And eventually, they run out of fuel to sustain that, because they're not gaining traction with people who matter. And then another challenge I think we face as a whole community is learning that we are gathering in information in order to practice our faith. The gathering of information is not a practice in and of itself, that it cannot be the whole shebang. We are gathering this information. We're wanting to use it. We're wanting to make personal application. We're wanting to allow it to become part of our lives, to change how we approach life, how we flow with those seasons of, the actual year, but also the seasons of life itself. That is the purpose of all of our study. It isn't about just being able to regurgitate other people's research. And I think that's going to be a very big challenge for certain quarters of paganism. And this is really why I consider my own approach to paganism and witchcraft as being kind of this kitchen table kind of approach. Practical, everyday. How are you going to use this? How can you make this better? more of that and a little less of my favorite theory is this, and that. That might be all very fascinating, but connect your theory to the real world, and then it's much more interesting. It's much more relevant. It has much more weight. So allowing us to focus on things that actually give our spirituality weight and depth, I think that's going to be part of the road forward for sure. And that's basically the thoughts that I have. That's where I really ended up with all of this. Is I do think that we will still see periods of contraction of particular traditions of paganism, as well as expansion, and I think that will continue to go on. Just like a little bit of a heartbeat. But I think where we're ultimately going is that we're starting to gain strength as more of a stable community. And I think the next step of forming that stable community is getting closer together, both geographically and, emotionally and spiritually and mentally, making those solid friendships, making this a proper community. I think we will get there. I think there's a lot of work to be done in our lifetime. I don't think that we'll get it all done in this lifetime, but I think we can definitely move things forward, especially over the next 20 years, as Pluto is in Aquarius, and that always coincides with events in the world that shake up the whole fabric of how civilizations are functioning. The last time we were here, as I mentioned a little while ago, we had the American Revolution. We also had the French Revolution. I think the American Revolution one turned out a bit better than it did for our French cousins, but that's neither here nor there. But that's the level of disruption that coincides with Pluto being in Aquarius. So we have an incredible opportunity to really use that to our advantage, and maybe it is the fact that I work so closely with Loki that I don't have the same anxiety about chaos, and I am more likely to see oh, goody gumdrops, look at all this energy. How can we play with it? What can we make it do? But then again, maybe that is why more people are working with Loki. I've said this before, that I think perhaps it is his approach of saying things are falling apart. That means you have all the energy you could possibly want to make decisions about how it gets rebuilt again. So that was my reaction to Jacob's live stream. If you haven't seen his stream, I would advise you to go over to him on YouTube. Just kind of hear where his thoughts were. Let him know what you were thinking. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for being with me. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.